Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Barrier Breach, a series where we go out of bounds in some of our favorite indie horror games. Now this game needs no introduction, we are doing Power Drill Massacre today. This is one of the earliest games to put Puppy Combo on everyone's radar, and I'm very excited to see what lies behind the scenes in this game, since of course it's very old and most likely works differently than most of their other games. I will say that this game was especially difficult to get the free cam to work in because of how old it is, and I almost gave up on trying to breach it, but don't worry, when there's a will, there's a way. Anyways, onto the video. So when you first load into the game, it shows you a quick pan of the surrounding forest with the sun setting in the background. When we enable the free cam, we get to see that this is of course showing the starting area that we start off at and is located right here beside the factory. Taking the camera all the way back to the beginning, we can see that there are two Megans right beside the crash site. The first one with her hand on her head is the one we get to play as, and the other one is just a placeholder that the game uses while doing that quick pan at the intro. This model does end up despawning once we get control of Megan. We can finally get a closer look at our boy Jeff, and he's not looking too good. I know the main goal of this game was to try and find help and eventually save Jeff, but yeah, he's cooked. The only thing of importance here at the crash site is of course the flashlight in the trunk of the van that we use to explore the factory. So something really cool is that all of the other environments are all placed here on this one map. Usually in newer games, they use separate scenes to distinguish each environment, but of course since this game is so old, everything was just placed in this one large map, but of course hidden underneath everything. Not only is there a secret area that I'm going to show you all very shortly, but also the entirety of the factory that I was able to spawn in prematurely. Don't worry, I will get to the inside of the factory when the time comes, but for now, take a look at this secret box that holds two Driller Killer models as well as the Ghost Man that appears very briefly when running up to the factory. We saw something very similar in Murder House, where that too had a box dedicated to holding the villain, but in this case, this one holds multiple models and for different reasons. So I will tell you right now, one of the Driller Killers is used to chase you when you are in the factory, and the other one is for one of the endings, and again, don't worry, we'll get to that later on in the video. Next, I wanted to show you all an area that I believe was scrapped during the final production. This little setting is aesthetically very similar to that of the inside of the factory, which makes me believe that this was possibly a room you could enter, or maybe just an extension of the playable area. Regardless, this is packed with different rooms that all connect to each other, as well as a set of barrels that were placed oddly, like this one that's right in front of the door. Besides all that, that's pretty much it for this little area, and it holds no significant value in the grand scheme of the game, as this was most likely just used as a testing room. Going back to the spawn, zooming out allows us to get a better view of the path that we take, which really simplifies how everything looks. I'm a pretty big dummy, so when I first played this game, I got confused on which path to take, but here you can see that both paths just loop into the same direction. Moving forward a little bit, we come across our first building, and it's this really creepy shed that holds a satanic symbol on the back of it. I'm not the most religious person by any means, but remember gamers, if you see something like this, get out of there. The inside is mostly empty, but does have these shelf things that have a weird buggy render thing going on where you're only allowed to view it from certain angles. Further up, we get to the outside of the factory, and this too doesn't have that much to show off, so we'll make this very quick. First, to the right of the factory, we have a second shed that is identical to the one we just went over, so there's not much to show here. Next, we have this really beat up blue car, the back of the entrance, and lastly, the stairs leading up to the factory. You can pretty much see all of this during regular gameplay, so I just wanted to make it really quick. So I'm sure all of you know of the man who appears at the top of the stairs when you get close to the factory, and now we can finally get a closer look at the model. Here you can see that I was able to spawn him in, which was very cool to do. You might notice that he is sort of transparent, and that's due to him being a ghost, even being called Ghost Man in the in-game files. I'm not entirely sure his exact relation to the game, but my assumption is that he is one of the victims who went missing in this area due to no other than the Driller Killer, and this is even supported by the newspapers we find throughout the game. For the absolute longest, I actually thought that this was the Driller Killer since his back was facing towards us, and also because he's pretty tall and lanky. So yeah guys, all in all, still a very interesting starting environment despite not having much to show off. Again, this game was released all the way back in 2015, so don't expect a ton of secret things, but we can still appreciate it for what it is. So we finally make it to the main part of the game, and that's of course the inside of the factory that we spend most of our time in. I was able to remove the ceilings and roofs as well as add a ton of light onto the map, so now it will make this 10 times easier to see everything. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, all of these environments are placed underneath the map and are all very close in proximity to each other. Here we have the first section, the second section, the third sugar tunnel section, and of course the end section labeled End Hallway. Now that we're down here and everything is spawned in, you can see how the box that holds the driller models that I showed you earlier is right beside all of this, which is where the game pulls the driller killer from when he spawns in and starts chasing you. During your gameplay, you might have noticed a ton of locked blue shutter doors that you cannot enter. And that is because these are all rooms that contain a spawn point for the killer to use to begin chasing you. Zooming out and no clipping everywhere really begins to show you just how many of these spawn points there are on this map, which is slightly creepy to think about. Just the thought that at any moment, any of these blue doors can fly open while you're walking by it really doesn't sit well with me, but I guess that's just the charm of the game. Before I show you any footage of the driller killer, I want to first just show you all the inside of the factory since it looks very different with all the added lights. So probably the biggest letdown about this game is that the driller killer does not patrol the area and is not spawned in a majority of the time. Unlike other puppet combo villains, the only times the driller killer is visible is when he begins chasing you. So you can imagine how difficult it was to get any decently long footage, as the second he chases you, he attacks you and takes you out pretty quickly. With that being said, I still managed to slow down the game greatly, which gives us an opportunity to watch the driller killer in action, albeit in super slow motion. Given how scarce his appearances are, this was just a compromise I had to make, so hopefully this ain't too boring to you all, although I'm sure some of you still want to see it. So the first encounter I had with him was right here, and this gives us the perfect opportunity to watch him and see his attack animation, which you are all seeing right now. It's a pretty simple animation, and definitely one of the more unpolished ones compared to their later ones like the Easter Ripper, but it's exactly stuff like this that adds to the charm of the game. Oh nah, this camera angle is crazy. When our player eventually does die, you get sent into this black box right beside the driller killer models, and the death animation plays here. Not only is it super cool actually being able to get up close to this, but the slow motion effects makes this feel so much more cinematic than it usually does. Here we can see poor Megan tumbling over while blood spurts from her neck area, and it's just brutal to watch. The blood not only continues spilling out indefinitely, but it also goes through the ground and creates this blood shower-like effect. This is what Barrier Breach is for, to be able to watch cutscenes and locked animations from different angles, because it provides a new look to some of our favorite games. The driller killer can be seen with his hands still up from when he attacked, and he just stays frozen right here until you restart. Next we have the sugar tunnel, and as you can see, it's part of the first section. Once you make it to the end of this short tunnel, you get teleported to the actual tunnel section, which as you can see is pretty complex and convoluted. This is mostly really just tunnels and hallways, so I'm just going to show you the most important things. The tunnel does eventually lead to the driller killer's room, which is one of the endings, but I will show that at the very end. But for now, let's move on to the last factory section. Again, not much else to show here that you haven't seen already, so here's just a quick montage of the place. So as I'm sure you all know, once you collect all 3 keys and escape through the locked door, you get the good ending where Megan escapes while running down this hallway. As you can see, it's its own separate object at the very end, and it's long as hell. You do run for a solid minute, so I can see why it's this long. So the only cool thing here is the driller killer that is placed right here beside a corner and waiting for you. I actually wasn't expecting him to be here at all. I know he ends up chasing you at some point, but I always thought he just spawned in randomly and from a random doorway. But nope, as you can see, he has his own little dedicated spot where he just stands there and waits. I find it funny how this is the only spot that extrudes out of the hallway because everything is pretty uniform for the most part. Red and white lights were also added near the end of the long hallway to create a bright light effect that eventually turns fully white when you make it to the end. So the other and more interesting ending is of course the bad ending, where Megan finds herself trapped in the room of the driller killer, where she eventually gets captured and tortured. I know you definitely are familiar with this room, so I won't make this too long. So I ended up waiting to see when the driller killer spawns, and as you can see, he eventually does right outside of the door. The door sort of glitches open and the driller killer targets you immediately, and when he does, you get teleported into the cage. I find it very cool finally being able to see what he does when he goes to the different rooms, and although it's pretty anticlimactic, it's still pretty awesome to see this cutscene from a different perspective. He's very weird and just stands awkwardly at different spots, not really doing much but staring. At some point he raises his drill and runs to Megan, where he presumably kills her and stops the game. So during my time barrier breaching this game, I got to see some pretty unique stuff, so this part of the video is dedicated to that. First, I wanted to give you all some more footage of the driller killer, since we don't get to see him that often. Because I slowed the timescale of the game by so much, I was able to get some really good footage of him, which would have been difficult to get normally. Usually you don't have the speed nor the time to turn around and really get a good look at the driller killer, so this was such a treat to do. When I was in the sugar tunnel, I was able to get really close to the ghost child, as you can see, and now we can finally get a good look at her. She runs to the end of the hallway and eventually despawns, but then the driller killer comes out from just around the corner and jump scares me. I'm not sure if this was part of the game's mechanics, but I'd like to think this was coded to happen if you chase the ghost child. Something genuinely funny that I found was this really distorted and shrunken version of Megan's head, which only appears when you're in first person. Guys, this caught me so off guard and I was genuinely cracking up when I zoomed out and saw this. Nah, why the driller killer giving her a haircut though? Finally, the last important thing I wanted to show you all was this hanging corpse that has a chance of spawning when you're in this room. I actually got this to spawn during my gameplay, but it was only for a second or two, so we can now finally see what this looks like up close. That is going to conclude the Power Drill Massacre barrier breach. This is definitely a game I wanted to breach when I first learned how to do this, so I'm glad I was able to get mostly everything and condense it all down to a video like this. Like I mentioned earlier, because of how old this game is, I almost gave up on trying to breach it because it was very difficult to get the free cam to be compatible with this game. Even when I did get it to work, the game was still very buggy and glitchy and made it hard to record, but you know I had to do it for you guys. Despite being such an old game, I still thought there was a lot to uncover and learn, so hopefully that's what I was able to do. As always, it's been real, and thank you so much for watching. I love you all, and peace out.